One night, they broke into his house. He never saw them coming. By morning, he would never see anything again. They say the men who ran this city gave the order themselves, out of fear. Fear that the man who had just built the greatest clock in Europe might build another one somewhere else in another city. So they took his eyes. And the story says that afterward, blind and furious, he found his way back to the machine one last time and reached into it, jamming the gears with his own hands, cursing it so that anyone who ever tried to fix it again would go mad or die. For 100 years, the clock never worked again. That's the story every tourist gets told, and it's almost entirely false. Here's what actually happened, and why the lie has lasted for hundreds of years. If you've read Dan Brown's newest novel, The Secret of Secrets, you've already stood in front of this clock, at least on the page. The entire book takes place in this city, and Prague Orloj is a recurring motif. The apostles processing on the hour while Langdon races against a deadline he can't stop. Brown picked this clock because it already carries 600 years of myth built into it. Today, we're going to pull that myth apart, because the real history of this clock is stranger than the legend. Let's tell the story the way it's been told for generations. The Prague city councillors commissioned a brilliant clockmaker named Master Hanuš to build them the most advanced astronomical clock in the world. And he did. When it was finished, there was nothing like it anywhere on the continent. The word spread. Messengers came from other cities, some say from as far as other kingdoms, hoping to lure Hanuš away, to have him build them a clock just as magnificent. The Prague councillors panicked. If Hanuš built another clock like this one anywhere else, Prague would lose what made this one special. So they made a dreadful decision. They had him blinded. Hanuš, now blind, was left with nothing but his hands and his memory of the machine he'd built. And in his fury, he asked to be led to the clock one final time. Once there, alone with it, he reached into the gears and jammed the mechanism completely from memory. In the most dramatic tellings, he dies right there, inside his own creation. The clock, they say, didn't run again for 100 years, cursed, silent, a monument to a betrayal. Here's where the story falls apart. The clock wasn't built by a lone genius betrayed by jealous politicians. It was built by a team working for the crown in the year 1410. The two men actually credited with its construction were Mikuláš of Kadaň, the royal clockmaker, and Jan Schindel, a professor of astronomy at Charles University. Between them, they had exactly what a project like this required. It isn't just telling the hour. The main dial is an astrolabe, a kind of analog astronomical computer. It tracks the position of the sun against the zodiac. It marks unequal hours, the way medieval Europeans divided daylight itself into 12 parts, regardless of the season. Think about what that means. In 1410, Copernicus hadn't yet proposed a heliocentric universe. Galileo was nearly 2 centuries away, and these two men, a professor and a craftsman, built a clock machine that still functions today. So where does Master Hanuš come in? Decades later, between roughly 1475 and 1497, a real clockmaker named Jan Ruja, known by the nickname Hanuš, was brought in to improve the existing clock. He very likely added the calendar dial and probably the moving skeleton figure that still appears on the hour today. He didn't invent the Orloj, he improved it decades later. But because his additions were so visible, and because he was the most recent name attached to the project, later generations simply started crediting him as the clock's original creator. That mix-up is the seed the entire blinding legend grew from. Before we go further into the myth, it's worth pausing on something this clock represents that's easy to miss entirely. It was one of the very first public clocks in the old town. Before this, time in Prague didn't belong to anyone. It belonged to the sky. If you needed to know the hour, you looked up. Time wasn't a number. It was a reading you had to take from the world, and it was never perfectly precise. There was a real legal concept called the hora legalis, the grace hour. If you arrived late to a court hearing or a council session, you weren't automatically in violation. The law itself accepted that time was slippery, and it forgave you for not catching it exactly. Compare that to now. We wear time on our wrists. We carry it in our pockets, less like a tool at this point, and more like a set of shackles we agreed to put on ourselves. For 6 centuries, this clock hasn't just told time, it's lived through history. And more than once, Prague had to fight to keep it standing. In 1648, in the very final year of the 30 Years' War, a Swedish army broke into Prague. They tore through Hradčany and pushed toward the river, heading straight for Charles Bridge and beyond it to the Old Town. What stopped them wasn't a professional army. It was ordinary Praguers, and famously, students from the nearby Clementinum, who picked up whatever weapons they had and ran to defend the bridge. They held the line. This clock was already 240 years old by then, so if the blinding never happened, where did the story actually come from? Credit goes to Alois Jirášek, a Czech writer working in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Jirášek spent much of his career collecting and retelling Czech folklore and legend. This was part of a much larger wave of national storytelling, a period when Czech identity, language, and history were being actively rediscovered and celebrated after centuries of Habsburg rule. The blinding story appears in his 1894 collection Ancient Bohemian Legends, and it caught fire. It was dramatic. It explained something people had been wondering about for centuries, why the Orloj had gone through long periods of silence and disrepair. The story spread from Jirášek's books into the oral tradition itself, until the legend became more famous than the man who wrote it, and people forgot it had an author at all. But Jirášek's story wasn't the only myth that attached itself to the Orloj. Once the legend of the blind clockmaker took hold, other stories followed, 3 dark curses in particular. First, the curse of the skeleton's nod. If the clock stops for too long, the skeleton figure rings his bell, and when he does, disaster follows. Disasters like fire or plague, war. Every calamity in Prague's history has been retroactively blamed on a stopped clock. The Orloj has stopped many times in its 600-year history, for repairs, for wars, for neglect. The most famous stoppage was May 1945, when the old town hall was shelled by Nazi artillery during the Prague uprising. The clock was badly damaged. It sat silent for 3 years while restorers painstakingly rebuilt it. If the curse were real, the Nazi occupation and the bombardment would be the result of a stopped clock. But the clock stopped because of the war, not the other way around. Second, the curse of the New Year's boy. Every New Year's Eve at midnight, a boy born on New Year's night must run from teen church to the Orloj before the final bell. If he reaches it in time, Prague is safe for another year. If he stumbles, suffering follows. No record of this curse exists before the 19th century. It appears to have been invented by tour guides to add dramatic texture to the clock's already rich folklore. Third, the Sparrow of Hope. A sparrow once flew into the skeleton's open mouth. The crowd below gasped. Surely the bird would die. 1 hour later, it emerged alive. A condemned knight who witnessed it took the bird's survival as a sign. He was pardoned. The skeleton, the story claims, is not death, but hope. So what is true about the Prague astronomical clock? It really is one of the oldest working astronomical clocks in the world. The mechanism is from 1410, and it is still operational till today. When you stand in Old Town Square and watch the skeleton pull the bell rope, you're witnessing a machine that has been doing that exact motion for over 6 centuries. The apostles were added later, the calendar dial later. The moving figures have been replaced multiple times, but the core of the clock is original. The clock survived the Hussite Wars, the Swedish siege of 1648, the Prussian bombardment of 1757, the Nazi occupation, and the artillery hit of 1945. Each time, Prague refused to let it die. After 1945, when the old town hall lay in rubble, the city rebuilt the clock first, before the rest of the building. That tells you everything about what this machine means to the Czech people. And the Hanuš legend? It may contain a grain of truth in dramatic clothing. Medieval clockmakers really did guard their secrets obsessively. There are documented cases of craftsmen being prevented from leaving a city after completing a unique commission. Not blinded, but pressured, bound by contract, forbidden from replicating their work for rivals. And yet, in a strange way, the legends have become part of the clock's true story. The Orloj is not just a machine. The myths are part of the monument now. And maybe that's the point Jirásek understood better than anyone. A great machine deserves great stories, even if someone has to invent them. I'm the Prague Historian. I'm uncovering the biggest myths and legends and bringing the real stories to you. In the next episode, we will reveal the historic facts about Prague's councilmen that were thrown from the window of the council house, and the 27 Czech nobles who were subsequently beheaded and tortured, right here, on these very cobblestones, beneath the same clock that watched it all.